All right, let's just jump right into it. There's this really provocative idea floating around that the youngest generation in the workforce, Gen Z, is, well, in decline. Today, we're going to unpack the arguments behind this whole controversy.
So here's the big question, the one that neuroscientists are actually asking. Is Gen Z, the generation that literally grew up with a smartphone in their pocket, the first in modern history to be quantifiably less intelligent than their parents? I mean, that is a shocking claim, right? So let's break down the arguments.
Okay, so first up, we're looking at this idea of a shocking generational decline. And look, we're not talking about a tiny little dip here and there. The claim is that this is a major, measurable drop-off across the board. So, what exactly is supposedly getting worse?
But before we go any further, let's just make sure we're all on the same page. Who is Gen Z? Well, we're talking about anyone born roughly between 1997 and 2010. You know, today's teenagers and young adults, the first generation to be true digital natives.
So the areas where this decline is supposedly happening, it's not some vague feeling. It's a pretty specific list. We're talking about attention, memory, basic literacy and numeracy skills. It even includes something called executive function, your brain's ability to plan things out and stay focused. And yep, even general IQ scores are on this list. It's a really broad and serious critique.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. When you hear about declining attention spans, your mind immediately goes to one place, right? Screens. But is our constant screen time really the root of the problem?
It's so easy to point the finger at that glowing rectangle we all carry around. But the perspective we're exploring here says, hang on a second. Maybe the tool itself isn't the issue. Maybe the real problem is the system that hands kids these powerful devices without teaching them how to use them properly.
And this really gets to the heart of the counter-argument with this powerful quote. Tools don't make you dumber, they make you smarter. The idea is, blaming our tech for making us dumber is like blaming a hammer for a badly built house. The problem isn't the tool, it's how we're being taught or not taught to use it.
Okay, so if the tool isn't the problem, then where do we look? Well, that brings us to the next big suspect on the list, the modern education system.
And the accusation here is a big one. It's that schools have fundamentally shifted their focus away from foundational knowledge and critical thinking and have instead started replacing education with identity.
To back this up, the sources point to some very specific and, highly contentious examples. Things like the school lockdowns and that nosedive in test scores that followed, the rise of political activism in the classroom, and the introduction of controversial ideas like teaching that gender is fluid and math is racist. The argument is that these priorities have pushed traditional education to the side.
Guest Lionel Shriver adds another really interesting layer here. She argues that instead of teaching intellectual humility, being aware of how much you don't know, the system is teaching arrogance. And why? Because we've devalued information, simply because there's so much of it available all the time.
And this hits on a crucial difference, doesn't it? The difference between actually knowing something and just having access to it. We've all been there thinking, I don't need to learn this, I can just Google it. The point here is that this mindset creates an illusion of knowledge without any of the deep underlying understanding.
But hey, schools aren't the only ones under the microscope. The conversation pivots again, asking if maybe we're looking in the wrong place entirely. Could this all just boil down to a failure of parenting? And wow, another guest, Tyrus. He does not pull any punches. He just comes right out and says it. It's not the screens. It's not the schools. It's the parents. Lazy parents. I mean, that's about as blunt as it gets.
And he breaks his argument down like this. He describes the past, where parents made sure you did your homework, and if you didn't have any, they'd make some up for you. That's contrasted with today, where he argues parents just hand a kid a tablet. The answers are instant, sure, but the actual learning gets skipped. The result, in his view, is that parents just aren't doing the hard work anymore.
So we've got our three main suspects: screens, schools, and parents. But the whole discussion circles back to a final and frankly, a very unexpected conclusion. This leads to a final diagnosis, that the core problem isn't any single one of those things, but a fundamental flaw in how we approach learning itself. The argument is that the real brain rot comes from a system that teaches kids what to think instead of how to think.
And this is where things get really wild. After this entire conversation about cognitive decline, the argument completely flips on its head. It suggests that this very environment could, counterintuitively, end up creating the smartest generation of all. Which sounds kind of crazy, right? How could that possibly be?
So we're left with this final, fascinating question to chew on. What if a generation that's constantly being fed narratives instead of facts learns to see through it all? What if they learn to question, to verify, to distrust the official truth-tellers? Could that skepticism actually forge a more resilient, more critical, and ultimately a smarter mindset than any generation that came before? It's a powerful idea to think about.